Typography is the art and technique of type placement, arrangement, and design for the purpose of aesthetics, communication, and readability of written language. A typeface encompasses style and symbology across an entire alphabet, including letters, numbers, and punctuation. Most people are familiar with the term font, which is a subset of a typeface. It describes a specific size and style of a typeface. So lettering on maps should enhance the message, not distract the reader. The correct use of type helps set the mood. So just like other map elements, fonts have and build hierarchy as well. You really want to make sure that you're using fonts wisely. They should be used in a constructive way. And so you want to encode your cartographic messages into the font. And just like I was saying in the last slide, there are cartographic conventions for font specifically. For example, and we'll get into more of them in the next few slides, but water is almost always labeled in italics. Larger letters are going to denote more importance on the map, and same thing with capital letters. So there is like a 3 font rule. You don't want more than 3 fonts on a map. So if you're doing like a locator map or a city map where you have your points of interest, let's say streets, different houses, or maybe, not houses, different buildings, or if you're looking at like a larger area where you might be looking at, states, countries, etc. And you also have your land features, mountain ranges, rivers, streams, stuff like that. You don't want to have more than 3 fonts. And so this is including things like your legend and your title. So if you choose to use a different font for your legend, well, the legend and title should all have the same fonts. But if you're going to be doing different fonts between your primary map elements and your secondary and tertiary map elements, that means that you'll still need to limit all of the labeling on your map to the 3 font rule. We also have, so most typefaces are distinguished within 2 categories. We have serif and sans serif. There are also display fonts, which are the most artistic and less standard fonts, and the textbook gets more into that. So basically a serif are these little ticks that you see, or edges on this font face. So, you could see here the F has those little ticks, and over here the F doesn't. And so they are supposed to help aid the eye to move smoothly over the letters when reading. And sans serif is literally the opposite. It translates into without serif. So there is different types of coding with color and font. And so these are a few examples of different ways that text has been coded for cartographic design. And so these are pretty standard. So, we have examples for administrative regions, cities, neighborhoods. We have man-made features, points of interest are going to be italic and red. You could go through the rest of these on your own time when I upload them. But again, we see water features, rivers, lakes, and oceans are going to be italic and blue. Even though there are standards to follow, remember to have fun and be creative. Cartography is a structured art, but it's still an art, and so you can definitely stay within the set cartographic conventions and make a beautiful map. And font has as much to do with that process as any other map element. But yeah, please don't use Comic Sans. This is something that's pretty standard across the education plane, whether you're making a map or writing a report or whatever. I'm not totally sure why there's so much hate on Comic Sans, but that's definitely a big no-no. And so it's just kind of like a running joke, and just want to make sure to make that point. Unless you were doing like a map for kids or something like that, it would be an inappropriate type of font to use. Color is one of the hardest parts of cartographic design to master because of its complexity. It is also one of the most powerful visual variables, as it is applied to every map element, from the map data to the color of the font you decide to use for the credits in your map. So we'll talk about a few different coloring schemes that you will learn how to choose when you start to make classified maps. And so you'll get a little bit of experience with this in this lab and then labs in the future as well. So in divergent schemes are best at highlighting a particular middle range of quantitative data. We talked a little bit about quantitative and qualitative data in the last lecture. So you would pick two saturated contrasting colors for the extremes of the data, and the middle ranges blend into a lighter mix of the two. This is particularly great for accenting the mean of your data and exposing locations that significantly diverge from the norm. Sequential schemes order data from high to low, accenting the highest as a dark shade and the lowest as a light shade, or vice versa. Sequential schemes are best if you are mapping quantitative data and do not want to focus on one particular range with your data. Qualitative schemes, if you are working with qualitative data such as ethnicity or religion, you want to pick a series, or as this example shows, soil even. It can be for whatever type of qualitative or categorical data you have. You want to pick a series of unrelated colors. The trick is to pick a really nice color theme so your map looks great. You can also accent particular aspects of your data by your choice of color. For example, one strong dark color among a group of lighter colors will pop out of the map, highlighting that particular facet of your data against all others. So color and context are closely related, and you want to keep that in mind. So just like with other map elements, color has its own set of cartographic designs. And so we'll just take a quick look at this map before going into the color conventions and moods. But as you can see here, we have green, and we can automatically assume that this is mostly vegetated area. And then we can see with our italic text here, we have Superior National Forest, George Washington State Forest, and then we can even see with the different colors of green here, this is a national forest versus a state forest. And then we have our three different types of font and different colors for the fonts as well, to determine, like, here we have, a landmark. We talked about it a little bit before with the italics and red. And then it's kind of hard to tell on this slide, but the bodies of water are italic and blue. So we'll go to this next slide here and talk about color conventions and moods. And so it just goes through different colors and what they could be used for when you're choosing colors in text. And so it goes over examples of what could be used and then what kind of mood you're creating. And so I'll just go over the first couple of them, and then once these slides are uploaded as a PDF, you could go through them in more detail. So as I've mentioned before, blue usually denotes water, and then, the mood that it creates is a cool serenity, melancholy. It also can be used as positive numerical values as well. And we could see green is generally denoted as vegetation, lowlands, forests, spring, and then it creates that like spring or nature mood. So in the text, it describes saturation as sometimes being referred to as chroma and represents the purity or intensity of the color. For example, candy apple red is a highly saturated color, but pastel pink is a desaturated color. Saturation is also sometimes described as the amount of gray added to a color. So a saturated color may look bright and vibrant, while a desaturated version may look somewhat muddy or dull. Saturation not only affects the visual hierarchy, but like value can be used to represent quantitative data. More saturation means higher numbers, just as with darker values. So let's talk a little bit about color equity. So around 8% of men and less than 1% of women have some degree of color blindness. Red-green is most common. We often encode maps with colors, so be careful, and you could keep a few things in mind. So you can test print a color map on black and white printer, or try this tool. So this link will be included in the PDF that I upload of the lecture slides. You could also check it out in the resources on the Module 2 homepage at the bottom. And so basically it'll take you to a website and you can play around with the different types of color saturation and what different types of colorblind people, like what they would see if you chose to use a certain color scheme. And so there's a picture already uploaded, or you could upload one of your own pictures or even a map. Here are some more color resources, and again, these links will be included in the PDF lecture slides. So 2 final cautions: be careful with color and be careful with patterns. So let's take a look at this map here. And so most of this map looks pretty good with color choices, but we can see that with these really saturated or close in color dots and buffer zones created. So we have these black dots here that are almost overtaken by that dark blue. So another color choice would have been more appropriate here, because those black dots are definitely lost within that blue buffer zone. So to wrap things up, basically don't make ugly maps. So a lot of this class is focusing on just introduction to the GIS software and how to create a professional looking map. And so the further we progress into the semester, the more strict the grading rubrics will be on map presentation and design. And so this is just the first exercise and you guys are just starting to learn. So really take note of all of the design concepts that we've learned in this lesson, because you'll realize that you're going to be using them quite a bit as you're designing your maps for the future labs. So something to keep in mind when you're planning your visualization, you want to learn about the subject that you are mapping. You know, there might already be a standard of how that type of data is being displayed in maps, so you could check out other representations or other authors. You want to pick out key details to represent, and you want to keep in mind, are there color schemes traditionally associated with it? Okay, so we've come to the end of this lecture video, and I'm just going to briefly go over the second part of the extra credit opportunity. So we'll look at this map here, and I want you to answer, does this map follow the basic cartographic conventions discussed in this lesson? So again, you'll be working from that Word document that you created with the first part of the extra credit opportunity. And so just as a second question, you'll go ahead and answer the above question using what you learned in language from the module's lecture and reading materials. And when you're done, with both parts, you'll save your document as a PDF and include it in your final subfolder of your Earthquakes of Northern California workspace folder, and just include it with the submission of your lab, which is due September 15th by 11:59 p.m. And also please remember to put your name and date on the Word document before you save it, and then as you're labeling it when you save it, make sure to put your initials on it so I know whose it is in your final folder.